Housing costs are wildly out of control, especially here on the West Coast and the East Coast. Middle of the country, not as bad, but everybody knows buying a house is darn near impossible. Now, what we got going at the federal level, the federal government is talking about an emergency declaration on housing to bring down the cost of housing. Is that actually going to have any impact whatsoever? Let's get into it. Here we go. If you're new here, my name's Sean Reynolds. I own an appraisal company. I've been a background in appraisal for past 30-something years. I'm also a designated managing broker. I own a real estate brokerage. We have about 100 brokers, something like that. We sell millions and millions of dollars of homes a year. But I'm more importantly a podcaster, right? That's what I do. That's what you know me from. Let's get into today's topic, which is I've got an opinion piece here from Fox News, and I'm going to go through that. And then we've got a bunch of other articles that kind of go into, all right, here's what some other states have done to not make their housing affordable. Let's not follow that, but let's see what that looks like. And then what are the actual impacts of a federal declaration? Literally, the federal government going, good Lord, housing prices are too expensive. What are we going to do, guys? Yeah, that's literally what we're talking about. Federal and local rules account for nearly 24% of new single-family home prices, housing experts say. All right, so you got to, and we all know that, inherently, you got a bunch of fluff in there that not only the federal government, but county and local city governments have put in the equation. Now, from my standpoint, it's not the federal rules that you need to worry about because all builders across the United States, they have to deal with the federal rules, right? But then you've got states like Texas, you got states like Florida, you got states like Oklahoma, you got states like Nevada that are building homes at a much, much more affordable rate. Why is that? Why are their land costs so much cheaper? Because of local nonsense, local restrictions on building said homes. And the cost of just gasoline in general. Take, for instance, cost of gasoline in Texas or Oklahoma right now might start with a 2, maybe a low 3. Here in Washington State, I am damn near $5 a gallon. So anything that requires, contractors drive those big trucks, well, boop, up goes the price of your home. And that goes for everything. The cost to get all the materials here, the cost to develop the materials, all of that is just inherently more. And also, we've constricted land in a lot of big blue liberal cities, counties, and states. You've restricted land with your growth management acts. Oh, you can build here, but you can't build here because, we got to save the wetland. We got to save the spotted owl. We got to save that big tree. But hey, we need more affordable housing. We've gone out of our way to make things not buildable. And in doing so, you got less housing. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent recently declared that President Donald Trump's administration is considering declaring an emergency situation for housing. He pointed out the weakest summer home sales in a decade, with more than 15% of transactions falling through in July, highest cancellation rate since record-keeping commenced in 2017. Prices, though below pandemic levels, are still too lofty for working and middle-class Americans. So what's caused this? July of 2022, interest rates started to move up very quickly because inflation became apparent. We were coming out of the pandemic. Trillions of dollars hit the economy. The Inflation Reduction Act, which should have been the Inflation Production Act. Yeah, you dump a couple $1 trillion on an already overheated hot economy. Those housing prices just went to the moon. And then when you take interest rates between 2.75%, push them all the way up to like 8%, that's what the market did. You take those home prices that have escalated rapidly, nobody can afford them. Nobody can afford them. So even in states like Texas, that's why they've had the biggest drop in pricing, because they had the most amount of inventory of new homes on the market. And these interest rates went up, and now their pricing's coming back down because, hey, What's it going to take to sell this? Let's drop that price. Besson is right to sound the alarm, and a housing emergency declaration is long overdue. Are we going to have a declaration for everything? It's an emergency. Or is it more like this is what happens to marketplaces when they get overregulated? So you got to understand, can you afford a Ferrari, or can you afford a Ford or a Kia or a Hyundai? If you can't afford that Maserati, that Lamborghini, that Ferrari, maybe you need to look at the Kia. Kia's a good car. It's going to get you there. Is it sexy? No. Can you afford it? Yes. And what I'm saying is this whole notion of affordable housing is a given right. It's not. Because that's not how the market operates, is it? Oh, here you go. Have a house. No, that's just not what happens. So housing emergency declaration, what's that really going to do? Well, it brings a notion to the fact that, hey, I can't afford a house. Neither can anybody else. When your median housing price is like $1.2, $1.3 million, half of your housing is more than that, half is less than that. That's unaffordable for all but, the strongest of wage earners, right? That down payment, that employment history, credit, all those factors, $1 million, that should get you a great house. But in a lot of markets, that's a starter. For too long, politicians have praised the virtues of home ownership because it's part of the American dream, right? While supporting policies that make it harder to achieve. America no longer produces enough houses to meet demand, and existing houses have become more costly than they would otherwise have been due to restrictions imposed by government, namely local and state government, on building and investing. Because you've got wildly disparate numbers between state to state. Wildly disparate. Washington, California, and Oregon, they're all kind of the same, with California leading the way with absolute nonsense. They have shenanigans built into their housing market 10 ways from Sunday. The most recent version of that would be a fridge for every apartment in California, thanks to a new law. And I'm not saying you should, not have a situation where you don't have a fridge or a stove in your rental unit, but when it's tradition that you don't, that a tenant brings one in, and then all of a sudden you've got a new law, like that, that adds to the housing cost. That adds a layer that sends the message to investors: don't invest in California. They're concerned about the tenant. They're not concerned about you, the owner of the asset. Washington Attorney General takes software company to court over rental price fixing allegations. Trying to blame the lack of affordable housing in Washington state on rental price fixing allegations. Software that takes data and analyzes it and gives to the landlord an idea of where their unit fits within the marketplace. Is that price fixing allegations? No, that's just business. But in a big blue state run by Democrats for years and years and years, 35 years, whatever it might be. And it's a shocker that we have some of the highest housing in the United States. Is it a shocker that we have some of the highest gas prices in the United States? No, none of these things are shocking. Well, let's get back to our original article. Let's keep going. Government regulations have been largely responsible for causing the shortage. Studies from the NAR, the home builders, showed that federal, state, and local regulations account for 24% of the price and more than 40% of the cost of new multifamily housing. Just the regulations and nonsense. And, you got to have this. Oh, you can't build there. Oh, you can build here. No, you can't build there. Oh, yeah, this tall. Nope, this wide. Oh, this far back. Setback, whatever. Zoning limitations to restrict density, lengthy permitting programs that draw out projects. Time is money, right? Time is money. Over years, and building codes that differ significantly from one jurisdiction to another all create unnecessary costs and lost time. And where do you have the most unnecessary costs and lost time? On the blue states, the Democrat-run states, because they're always thinking, how can we protect the consumer? And invariably, whatever they come up with ends up costing the consumer more money. Like rents are going to go through the roof in Washington state because we already have a shortage of rental housing because nobody can afford a damn house. And so you got a situation you already don't have enough homes for rent. And now you're introducing legislation that basically tells investors, don't build in Washington state. They want to cap your rent. Literally, that's another one. Cap on rent increases across Washington is signed into law. That was this past spring, 2025. Nothing says don't build here more than we're going to tell you how much you can change the rent on your asset that you own. These are basic things, and that's going to take out a certain segment of the landlord from the equation. Fewer rental properties. Price on rent has one place to go, and that is up. The Trump administration does indeed choose to declare a national housing emergency. Its resulting emergency plan should not seek to micromanage local housing markets because you can't. You can't micromanage local housing markets. And that's why this won't really have much of an impact from that standpoint, or build new federal bureaucracies we're going to make this better. We're going to more government. Instead, it should focus on clearing away the obstacles that make it harder for the private sector to meet today's growing demand for housing. Okay, so you're going to clear away some of the obstacles. All right, going to cut this down in time for the permitting process. We're going to allow you to build over here, not there. We're going to make this simpler. But you've already got an existing land price of what? $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, maybe $1 million. That's your base cost just to get your project going. Not building a damn thing. Raw land cost. Already unaffordable, right? What would this do to that? Nothing. So bottom line to me is you can do a national housing emergency declaration. You can tell local housing markets, hey, you guys need to clean things up. You need to get rid of some of that fluff. But this has been built in over decades and decades and decades. And what markets have, that's what those markets have. So again, if you can't afford that market, there's this notion of you got to make a decision that makes sense for what you can and can't do. Maybe you can't live in Washington state. And moving forward, that's what's going to happen. And that's what's already happening. People are voting with their feet, meaning they're moving. People are moving away from California. People are moving into Texas. They're moving into Florida. Now, you've got all kinds of migration patterns and work from home and other stuff there. But when you go to a market where you have a decent little 3-bedroom, 2-bath home that's in the low to mid 300s, and then that same home is, jammed in amongst 5 other homes in a tiny little block in a super dense area of Seattle. Just sketchy. There's no parking. And that's, 800, 900,000 for an urban nightmare. Maybe 700,000, 800,000, somewhere in there in not a great neighborhood. Double to triple. Have it make sense. It doesn't make sense. Wherever stringent restrictions have been imposed upon developers or landlords, big blue states, housing availability has contracted and affordability has gotten further out of reach, pricing to the moon because of the shenanigans of local government. Conversely, where markets are free to act, Texas, Florida, Oklahoma, when permitting is streamlined, financing is accessible, and development is allowed to respond to demand, it's more elastic. That supply-demand curve is more elastic, meaning it can respond. Whereas in Washington state, it takes so long to get a project off the ground that the market demand and supply may have gone up once or twice in the time it takes you to bring a property onto the market. Allowed to respond to demand, housing has become more plentiful and prices have stabilized. And in markets where you've got less just nonsense, less Democrat shenanigans, let's call it what it is, in those markets, your housing prices have gone up at more of a steady rate. You don't have these huge spikes because you've got more supply. California shows how this plays out. For decades, stringent zoning, environmental vetting brought building close to a halt. Just, boop, nobody's going to build, leaving the state short almost 1.3 million units, according to one recent estimate. By contrast, states like Texas, which moved more quickly on permitting and allowed higher density development, and they allow blow and go, right? Blow and just, yep, 100 acres, you betcha. Just take your D8 and let's clear that and let's go. And they're able to do that. Whereas in California, you might have 14 weeks allotted to, I saw a grasshopper. I saw a rare grasshopper. We're not going to let you build. We need the grasshopper scientists to come out and do an analysis. And as you delay, cost of that project just goes up. And you're layering that on top of already existing hundreds of different policies that push that price up. So by contrast, states like Texas move quickly on permitting, allow higher development. They've seen faster growth in supply and more moderate price increases. Makes sense. They've got more supply. It's more of a market where you've got things in balance. Even as their populations expanded, they've got the room to expand. Oftentimes in these kind of states, you've got highways that have been planned out for decades, and they've got the land to do it, right? And so you don't have the traffic constrictions that you do, say, here in Washington State, where our traffic is a nightmare because we're always trying to play catch up with population and we never get there. In fact, home prices are declining faster in Texas than any other state. 100% true, because they were able to build the most. Oh, got caught with a little bit of supply. Oops, got to bring those prices down to get them sold. Instead of following states like Texas's lead in tackling the root causes of housing shortage, Washington, D.C. continues to scapegoat the private sector. Take, for example, the trend of blaming rent pricing software. RealPage, we've talked about that, podcasts on that. Hey, why is the price of our apartment rental units, why is that so high? It's rent software. And you're like, what? They're colluding to raise your rents. Nah, it's a market thing. And these are just tools. These are tools that are used by developers, by apartment owners, by apartment investors to get the data together and figure out where their units fit within the marketplace. That's just called smart business. And you've literally got attorney generals suing because they're saying this is price fixing. Well, so if you fix the price at $5,000 across the board for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath unit, would you get it? Oh, you wouldn't? Oh, so that whole notion of price fixing, there's market limitations to that? Oh, okay. So what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Makes no sense. It makes no sense. But hey, let's go ahead and blame the software algorithms and AI for how high the, apartments have gotten in any given marketplace. Because those are mental shenanigans that the market, it's just not a reality. Or how about the federal and state lawmakers who have chosen to point their fingers at housing investors, big corporations coming in? What about them? They're pushing the rates up. Study led by New York University's Joshua Coven found that markets with greater institutional investment saw both an increase in available rental housing goes up, measurable drop in rents because it's all about demand and supply. Weird. You have provided liquidity to the marketplace. Whereas in other markets, a lot of Washington State, Oregon, the big institutional investors, they can't make a go of it because we don't have huge, vast amounts of tract housing that they can cherry pick and know what they're going to get for rent. We don't have that. We also don't have the big national home builders here because they can't pick up big enough pieces to develop that make sense. Whereas you go into an Oklahoma City, and you buy a huge tract, you know what the acquisition cost is going to be. You know what the zoning's going to be. You're not going to have somebody coming after you because you might have a spotted owl on your property. Oh, you got that grasshopper. It's not a thing, right? And this is because large-scale investors add to the pool of available rentals. Weird. Which can cause competition and moderate costs. You need more units. You're not going to get more units in areas that are already inherently way out of line with affordability. $1 million median housing price. Those markets are toast, right? Those markets are toast. So you got a situation where only the wealthy are going to be able to afford those. That's reality. That is reality. In other words, when investment is welcomed and new units are built, families benefit directly through lower costs and more options. And what I would say is better housing, better developments. You've got more things for outside of the home. You've got developments where you've got parks, you've got attributes that you're not going to find in other markets, like no parking. I got 18 neighbors surrounding me, all looking in the bedroom, that kind of thing versus, hey, we're in a little bit of a cul-de-sac here and we can walk down the street. Little Jimmy and Susie can play and do their thing. I'll say hi to the neighbors. We'll go through that song and dance. Whereas in other markets, you don't have that and it costs twice as much and you're getting half the house. So, instead of seeing its role as one of restricting market activity, the Trump administration should view its job as one of increasing it. Because the only way to solve an affordable housing shortage is to build and invest more. 100% agree, 100% agree. But how are you going to do that? How are you going to do that? Proposed ban on rental price fixing software heading back to Portland City Council. Notice the trend here. You got people that are mentally challenged. Expensive here because software. It is literally shenanigans of the highest order. And you're like, what? You're doing what? This makes no sense at all. And that is how we get housing at the levels that we've got it. And people are like, wow, West Coast is really expensive. Yeah. How a national housing emergency could open more doors for first-time buyers. Well, let's check that out. This is an article based on, all right, if we do it, here's what that's going to do for us. Let's check this out, right? I think this is a pretty good one. Under the Trump administration, believe affordable home ownership, fundamental part of American dream. Going to do a national declaration. The administration hasn't laid out specifics, but Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent suggested that everything is on the table. So what does that mean? Has it ever been done before? During Harry Truman's time, because you didn't yet have severe housing shortage after World War II. You've got post-World War II housing, right? All the guys came home with the GI Bill, and there was massive demand for housing. Hey, didn't die in the war. Let's come back. Let's make some babies. Let's get going because we've been fighting that war. And, we had a lot of lives were upended, uprooted, and people wanted to get back on that track and there wasn't enough housing, right? So you had that. By contrast, the 2008 subprime mortgage collapse, while certainly a national emergency, was not handled through executive powers. That was a market issue, right? As is this to a large degree. But it's gotten so bad, the housing thing has gotten so bad that now we're looking at, well, what can the feds do? And not a lot is the answer. So let's go through here. 5 ways emergency powers could help first-time buyers, freeing up federal land for housing. Talking about BLM, Bureau of Land Management land. You could build 3 million homes. All right. That's an absolute no-go because where you're going to build those homes is nowhere near employment centers. It's always way out in the dingles. There's no infrastructure for this land to be developed. That's a hard no-go. Nobody's living there today. Nobody's living there tomorrow. Think more like mountain land that has virtually no value because you can't develop it. Pressure to reform local zoning. That's already happening in the most expensive of markets. like the infill zoning. You got a standard single-family home. Now you can build 4 homes. You can build a DADU, a detached accessory dwelling unit. You can build 2 attached dwelling units. You're creating a nice-looking ghetto. That's what you're doing in a residential neighborhood. So good luck with that. And if you're by a bus, stop or light rail or whatever, you can build 10 homes on your old single-family home lot. Yeah, perfect. Excellent. So reform local zoning. Okay. But that doesn't decrease your land value. It doesn't decrease your costs. It just allows you to build a little bit more. You've got economy of scale. Who benefits there? Builders. Because now you take that 10,000 square foot lot and they're off to the races with 8 units, lowering closing costs. All right. Closing costs run between 2% and I don't know. Why isn't this working? Yeah, here we go. Between 2% and 5% of a home's purchase price. So you're going to toss in. So now you go from, let's say, $1 million home, right? You got 2%, 20 grand. All right. So we're helping people with their closing costs. That does 0 for affordability. Might do a little bit for a handful of people to get them in, but the home's purchase price on top of the down payment, inspection fees, moving expenses, 2% and 5% closing costs. I figure 8% in closing costs. That's what we figure here because we've got big excise tax in there as well, 2%, something like that. You got real estate commissions. You got cost of escrow. You've got cost of title. You got cost of building inspection fees, that kind of stuff. 8%, right? So reducing at 2%, maybe 5%. Not really going to do anything for your affordability. You might get a few people in, but not going to do much. Maybe lower mortgage rates. That's been the big hindrance, isn't it? But even if you get rates down to 3% and your median housing price is, say, 1.2, 1.3, how many people can afford that even at 3%? Well, more. But you see where I'm going here. Oh, houses got too expensive. We need to drop those rates. Well, those rates react to a whole bunch of other things in the economy. They're not just rates for homes. Mortgage rates are. That's literally what they are. But we're talking interest rates of other markets as well, which is what the 10-year treasury is what more accurately predicts and corresponds to mortgage rates, right? And so there's nobody that flips a switch and says, make mortgage rates, lower. You've got inflation concerns, and that's why the Fed has been such a big pivotal piece here, because they've been reducing rates, but a lot of what's already been in the mortgage market has been telegraphed from what the Fed has said they're going to do, and that gets baked into your pricing. And then you don't really have much change in mortgage rates when the Fed actually drops them. Doesn't happen. You've already got that change from 2 weeks ago when the Fed said something about something and mortgage rates changed wildly. And then when the actual reduction takes place, hey, the Fed cut rates. Why didn't mortgage rates go down? Because that's not how it works, right? So you got lower mortgage rates. Okay. But then you've still got massive down payment. You've still got inability to qualify for financing. Yeah, you got lower rates. And that's why when things were 2.75%, everybody jumped on ship and they're like, man, we don't know when we're going to see this again. I'm going to lock this bad boy in and I'm going to ride it. And we had about 10 years worth of business go through in a couple of years. And then since then, the real estate market's been on life support. It's just like, wow, things are too expensive. Rates are too high. We're not making enough money. Our job raises aren't allowing us to get into the market. And that's why we're talking about this, because you do have a massive affordability issue. But to me, there's nothing the government can do. There's nothing local, state, federal government can do to really move the needle much at all. Because so much of this is already baked into the process. You're not going to come into Washington State, get rid of the Growth Management Act, get rid of local zoning, get rid of local expectations, get rid of local building code. You're not going to tear up all that is all these complex layers of stuff that are designed to protect the consumer, but actually they just cost the consumer more in housing. You're not going to just come in and, well, we're going to shit can that. We're going to get rid of that. And these shenanigans over here, they're gone. This one's gone. You're not going to do that. So what are you left with? Areas that are expensive are only going to get more expensive. And areas that are affordable, they're going to get more expensive too, just at a lower rate. At a lower rate. So you're going to have less appreciation. You're going to have less ability to move up quickly. But you will have gotten into the game, which is, hey, I got a house. This is great. You know what I mean? So where is, real estate is local, isn't it? Real estate is local. Mortgage financing, national. The rest is local. While the Federal Reserve doesn't set mortgage rates directly, an emergency declaration could ramp up political pressure on the Fed. Even then, a rate cut alone doesn't guarantee mortgage relief. Rates are more closely tied to the 10-year. Okay, so not much that can be done there, although that would be helpful. But the underlying issue, which is housing affordability and inability for people's incomes to have caught up to being able to buy a home, things have just ramped up way too hard. Offering down payment assistance. Okay. I mean, so $1 million home, you 20% down. So you can go conventional. You got an $800,000 mortgage. You needed $200,000 and you're making $60K a year and you're 26, 27, 28. Tell me how that works. Make those numbers make sense. Doesn't make sense, does it? So, all right, we're going to give a down payment. So you can go 3.5% on an FHA, right? Get 1%, 2% down payment, but then you've got a massive loan, and that's if you qualify. So offering down payment assistance sounds good. It's a great soundbite. Doesn't really do anything. In the short term, the most impactful solution would be targeted federal support for down payment assistance. All right. But that right there kind of tells you the limitations of what the government can do stepping in to a market that's based on capitalism. By bridging that gap, down payment aid could help more renters transition into ownership. I think we're beyond that. I think in most of these markets we're talking about, we're beyond that. The liquidity issue, the affordability issue is such that a little bit of a down payment, that's not going to move the needle much. So what it means for first-time buyers in 2025 and beyond, national housing emergency may sound dramatic to those who haven't been following the market, but for those who have been living it, it can't come soon enough. I hate to break it to you. This isn't going to do anything. It's not going to do anything. Such a declaration could elevate housing to a top-tier national issue and help create momentum for reforms that have long been stalled at the local level. And that's what I'm talking about. And you know what? While you've still got numbnuts going down these ridiculous avenues, cap on rent increases across Washington state. This is genius. We're protecting the consumer. And all you're doing is reducing the supply of rental housing. You're reducing the number of investors in Washington state, and prices will go boop one way. And that's not down. When you're doing this, the rental price fixing allegations, hey, let's blame. We've got all these policy issues in Washington state, my home state here, because we've been run by Democrats for the last 35 years that have made housing outrageously expensive. But let's not blame those local policies. Let's go ahead and blame price fixing due to software. Good God. And then you got the fridge in every California unit. All right. You know what I mean? The software. It's mind-blowing to hear people talk and actually say, we are really protecting the consumer here. And then the consumer gets their 10% rent increase. It's gone from $2,500 to $2,750. And they're like, that's perfect. I love a 10% rent increase on my rate, my rental, my monthly rental. So much ado about nothing. That is my bottom line here. It brings this to the head, but I think most families who are paying rent, who want to buy a home, who have bought a home, maybe they're looking to move up, everybody already knows, wow, in a lot of these markets, this is untenable. And that's why you're seeing as much migration as you are. You are seeing people move to more affordable areas because it just makes sense. Lower taxes, lower inflation, maybe no state income tax, maybe no state sales tax, cheaper housing. The list just goes on. Hey, if I can find a job to make that work, that's what you do. And here's the big hint. You're not seeing that happen in the big urban markets, the big urban cities run by Democrats. You are seeing this happen typically in more purple, but more importantly, more red states because they get it. They haven't loaded up their development programs with all kinds of nonsense to benefit the consumer. They've let the market rip. And that's why they've got more supply, cheaper housing, more bang for your buck. And it's because you've got leadership that understands, hey, this is what's actually good for our constituents. Affordable housing, lots of it. Good schools. The list just goes on and on. Good infrastructure. I mean, just night and day. So those states are not focusing on rental software. Those states are not implementing rental caps. Hey, you can't do what you want with your asset. They are not doing that. And that's what's causing them to be successful as far as being able to provide actual affordable housing. And that's why businesses are moving there and people are moving there because it makes sense. It makes sense. So I think what you got to do is you got to analyze where you want to be, what that looks like, and not try and pound that, round peg into a square hole or whatever that saying is. Because if you're in a market where you're like, I don't know how I'm ever going to afford to buy a home here, then maybe that's a market that you're not supposed to be living in. Maybe you need to go to one where you can make that work. And I think over the next handful of years, you're going to see an entire generation of potential home buyers look at that and go, that makes more sense. Hey, ideally, I'd love to live here because of the mountains, the ocean, the lakes, the whatever. But if you can't afford a home and if that's important to you, maybe you go somewhere where those things aren't as prevalent, but you get your home. All right. That's it for me on this one. Thanks so much for being here. Love to have you subscribe, do all that good stuff. Let me know what you think. Is the federal declaration of an emergency housing market, is that really going to do anything? You tell me what you think. Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much. See you in the next one. Bye for now.